Welcome to the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Before we begin this episode, let me bring you up to speed on where we're at in Samuel's journeys. We just concluded the year 1781. Samuel was employed for a short time in Kingston, Jamaica by a Mr. Byrne, who was in the business of buying and selling wares. Mr. Byrne attempted to cheat a ship out of payment by making Samuel hide with the payment notes until the ship was forced to leave. The plan failed, and Samuel was caught. He found himself back in the service of the packet fleet aboard the Grenville and completed a voyage across the Atlantic to Great Britain, where we find him now. My third voyage in the Grenville commenced the 12th of February, 1782, on which day we sailed for Madeira and Charlestown, South Carolina. The 22nd saw the island of Madeira, and the next day, being calm, we could not get into Funchal Bay, but a Portuguese boat having come alongside, the captain hired her to carry the mail on shore. Accordingly, the bag was handed in, and the captain, with Mr. Shoalbred, a Charleston passenger, and myself accompanied the mail. These boats, belonging to the island, are much better calculated to land in the surf on the beach than ship's boats, being made stronger and the stem so high as to support a man standing up ready for a chance to spring on shore on the blue pebbles with which this bay abounds. They have also ring bolts for oxen to draw them up on dry land. On approaching the beach, the health officers, after the usual inquiries, permitted us to leave the boat, when the captain proceeded to pay his respects to the governor, and I carried on the mail to the post office, where my old friend Marcus was glad to see me. I was then ordered to an English tavern to get my breakfast off a cold boiled neck of mutton and cold parsnips, for which, with a glass of wine, the captain was charged half-a-crown. I dined in the agent's kitchen, and afterwards walked about the town. I saw a funeral passing through the street in procession, attended by a vast concourse of ecclesiastics and a numerous body of the lower class, bearing in their hands enormous lighted wax candles, though in broad daylight. Some of the friars carried crucifixes elevated on poles, and the corpse appeared in an open coffin on disorderly men's shoulders, all with great parade, as usual, with the Romish church. Being curious, I joined the motley assemblage, and proceeded to the church, the ecclesiastics bawling the litanies in Latin all the way. I entered the church with the rest, and as soon as the corpse was placed on the floor, all the lights were extinguished, except one solitary lamp, and the windows were not to be discovered, being covered with thick curtains. Everything appeared so awful and alarming that I began to wish myself out. At last I espied at a distance the daylight through a door that was opened. I immediately proceeded to the spot where I had discovered the light, and soon got out into the street, to my great joy. This is a noted place for bells tingling at night, not for their melody, but to call the friars and priests to prayer, and I believe there is little cessation during the absence of the sun. But some church, monastery, or nunnery, either chiming, tolling, or tingling a small or large bell, is not unpleasant to the seamen on their watch in vessels lying in the bay. From the anchorage, a large monastery with 2 towers may be seen very high on the mountain above the town. This edifice is often enveloped in floating vapor, and the summit of the mountain appears clear, towering above the clouds, which has a pretty effect from the bay. The produce of this island consists of wine, onions, walnuts, grapes, oranges, citron, lemons, pomegranates, etc. Here the adventurers in the packets exchange English manufactures for wines, walnuts, and onions, which answer in the West Indies and Charleston. It is customary to allow the seamen to attach from 10 to 15% to the amount of this invoice, and to take this increased amount in payment for the wines. Those are generally inferior that they barter in this manner. The traders in these vessels, not being willing that the Madeira wine merchants should get much profit by them, are in the habit of making out what they term saltwater invoices, which is a false document fabricated on the passage to this island, in which they add a profit to every article therein, and this they exhibit as an original and true bill of parcels. On a former visit to this place, I was on shore with the ship's boat, waiting on the captain, but was ordered to return to the ship without him. As the boat's crew could not be found till very late, the boat was anchored without the surf. At length they all arrived, and on getting into the cutter, a strange man endeavored to force himself also into the boat, and on being repulsed, he hung by the gunwale, entreating to be taken on board, and we were obliged to unloose his hands and let him get on shore as well as he could in the dark. Doubtless the man was a criminal and wanted to escape from justice. At midnight, a breeze springing up, we made sail for Charlestown. On the 15th of March, we had lightning from all quarters and saw a large waterspout at a distance. On the 18th, a ship chased us, and on the 19th, about 11 at night, she drew very near. Called all hands to quarters, after which the ship hailed us and informed us she was an English cruiser, ordering at the same time our boats to be sent on board, which was attended to, and the boat returned with strange armed men instead of our boat's crew. On their coming on deck, they informed our captain that the ship's name was the Trumbull, I believe, an American frigate, on which the captain gave the signal for our mail to be sunk, and surrendered the ship without any further ceremony. Our crew immediately went below to secure their clothes, and all was in confusion. I had heard from several seamen that it was useless when captured to endeavor to save many clothes, as they were generally taken away on going on board the enemy. I therefore only filled a pillowcase and abandoned the rest, with all my bedding. On meeting my friend, Mr. Spurrier, the sailing master, he requested I would retire to his cabin in the cockpit and there wait for him. After a while he came and informed me that he was to remain in the prize, and he would endeavor to retain me also. I therefore continued in this retreat most of the night, with the door shut on me, but recollecting that there was a cask of walnuts in the cockpit, now abandoned by its owner, the boatswain, and being very unconcerned at our capture, I proceeded to help myself to some of the nuts, which I now conceived to be pro bono publico. Having taken a quantity, I retired again to my castle, the surgeon's cabin being directly opposite. He was a German, so on hearing me cracking the nuts, he became exceedingly angry and reprimanded me warmly, not for taking the nuts, but for being so inconsiderate as to eat this article at a time when he was overwhelmed in trouble. This reproof had little effect as I continued to devour the nuts. The people having now been removed to the American, at daylight I came on deck, and on viewing our enemy, found her to be nearly of equal force with our ship, she having 18 guns and 75 men, and our ship 16 guns and 60 men. Her name was the Franklin, Captain Duval belonging to Salem, and I afterwards found that our crew, though less in number, was much superior in strength and ability. Had our commander been a man of spirit, and not suffered himself to be imposed on easily, I have not the least doubt but we should have beat her off, if not taken her. About breakfast time, the captain of the privateer came on board to see his easy prey, and to select what he chose to be removed into his ship. He had on a hair cap and a rusty red coat, apparently French cloth, and had the appearance of a Frenchman. I now began to contrive to ingratiate myself into the favor of the prize master by offering to superintend the cabin and provide the victuals. This pleased him, and I therefore commenced my services. In the afternoon of the 20th, the boats were hoisted in, and the prize master, Mr. Potter, the first lieutenant, was ordered to proceed to Boston, and the Franklin departed for the Cape of Virginia to land her numerous prisoners. Those of our ship's crew that were left consisted of the sailing master, surgeon, a sick man, a boy, and myself. In the course of the day, our 2 officers, having drunk pretty freely, I imagine to drown their troubles and exhilarate their spirits, the surgeon fell asleep in the sun on the windlass after dinner, and during his nap I believe some person cut away his pocket, in which he had some letters. On awaking, missing his pocket, the master being near him, he accused Mr. Spurrier with the theft, on which Mr. Spurrier struck the doctor and strained his wrist. As the fight was soon over, and the parties reconciled, the surgeon applied something to the sprain forthwith. Toward evening the wind began to freshen, till a violent storm came on from the southward. We therefore scudded away before the gale, but I believe it was past midnight before we had secured the sails, our new crew being few in number and of the most wretched description. I exerted myself to the utmost aloft, and on laying out the main top sail yard to furl the sail, for want of active assistance, I was considerable time wrapped up on the yard and the sail, and was disengaged only from my perilous situation by the topsail providentially unfolding itself again. After securing this sail, on my descending the main shrouds, they appeared very slack, and on inspection found most of them were stranded. We therefore fixed tackles from the masthead to secure it from going by the board. During our bustle, the main quarter hatch being off, The sea poured down in such a manner as to oblige us to resort to the pump. The guns, also having been neglected to be secured, gave way, and we had some trouble in lashing them fast. The prize master kept at the helm a great part of the night for want of a proper man to relieve him, and on my going down into the cabin, found the water had gotten in there, and a quantity of cheese being loose, and the wet getting to them, made them so slippery that they were running from side to side almost every roll, which was extremely dangerous. The next day the wind moderated, which enabled us to put things in a little order. The American officers appeared sober men, as they generally drank water mixed with bottled porter, though some of the crew had broached a pipe of Madeira wine in the between-decks, and cut up the cheese which they fried in the pan to eat. I now discovered 2 of my blankets, but my bed had been emptied of its contents by one of our own seamen, as I found out afterwards. I now emptied a cask of walnuts into a chest in the cabin, and having discovered a superior cask of Madeira wine in the storeroom, lately belonging to one of our passengers, I broached it for cabin use. I also discovered 2 boxes of preserved citron, which I took care of for my own use. The next day, the 22nd, we were chased by a ship which gained on us, as we were not in a condition to make the most of our sails. The next morning, before day, the ship ranged alongside, which we found to be His Majesty's ship Garland, of 20 guns, Captain Chamberlain. The Americans were now taken, and a master's mate and crew sent on board in lieu thereof. The 23rd, after the Garland had taken from our vessel what they liked, we made sail in company for our original place of destination, Charlestown. Hitherto I had 2 or 3 valuable watches of the master's adventure tied up in the tail of my shirt to conceal from the Americans, which much incommoded me, for which I was now relieved. I continued to provide the cabin mess, consisting of 2 officers from the Garland, and our surgeon and master, till we arrived at the bar of Charlestown. The American crew were sent to the Howe prison ship, and our vessel was placed under the care of the Court of Admiralty, who ordered the goods found on board as adventures to be sold by vendue. On our arrival here, the Halifax Falmouth packet was in the harbor, and a few of the men were sent to look after our ship. Soon after this she was again commissioned, and the sailing master of the said packet, a brother to the captain, was made our commander, who I shall in future call Captain Lofty. This captain was about 2 years older than myself, and his father, an old captain, lived next door to my father in Falmouth, and before we went to sea, was my intimate acquaintance and boon companion. But at home, after I had begun to sail in the packets, his brother having pushed me forward, and I having no friend, he began to show his superiority by slighting and totally withdrawing himself from my society. He, finding me in the cabin, requested I would continue to act as steward till he could procure a suitable person, and then I was to be made second mate. We began to pick up a few seamen also, and news arriving in April that Sir George Rodney had defeated Count de Grasse, we prepared for firing a royal salute of 21 guns, on half of which I was appointed to fire. In the evening, the town was illuminated. The American army, under General Greene, was not at a great distance from ours, under the command of General Leslie, the latter being encamped to guard the town at the distance of about 7 miles from it, and the American distance of about 7 miles from it, and the American army had cut off most of the supplies from the country, by which means provisions were scarce and the prices exorbitant in the garrison. On Sunday, having liberty to go on shore, my curiosity led me to visit houses, etc., where I had spent many happy hours at 11 years of age, when here with my father in 1774 and 1775. But alas, what a change! I could only discover one person who had been a planter, and now kept a store. Numbers of houses were in ruins, and their once opulent owners dead, or unknown to the present inhabitants. The markets were thinly supplied, and an egg fetched 3 pence in a place where I had formerly purchased a live partridge for either a penny or a halfpenny. The statue of Lord Chatham, erected in the public square, was much defaced by the shot in the siege. The church tower, a wooden edifice, very lofty, was painted black, to prevent its being seen at a distance at sea, it being a landmark to ascertain the entrance of the bar, and was formerly painted white. The wharf in Cooper's River, where my father's vessel loaded, was in ruins, and the proprietor's, Mr. Gibbs' elegant mansion was now a hospital. Such are the ruinous effects of war. On the outside of the town lines, where I had formerly walked under the refreshing shade of lofty spreading trees to visit a pleasant, well-regulated tea garden, no trace could now be discovered of either trees or garden, but all appeared void and waste, like the soul of a natural man unrenewed by grace. We now procured an English cook and a French steward, both of whom had been planters in the state of South Carolina, and being reduced and unable to pay their passage to Europe, took this method to get there. The Frenchman, Monsieur Linné, was a decent, well-behaved man who took my berth in a few days after I had shown him the requisite duty. I was now appointed second mate, and was employed to fill the ship's water for our passage home, which we pumped out of a pond above the town, at some distance up a creek, in which a numerous quantity of turpin or sea tortoises were to be seen, swimming with their small heads above water, appearing like snakes, while others were walking on the mud at the riverside. One day, having occasion to go to the army smithy about some ironwork, a soldier belonging to the regiment of Old Buffs was in the shop, and on my mentioning that I knew a Captain Casement of that regiment, while quartered at Helston, where I was at school, the soldier replied that at that very time he was Captain C.'s servant, but now his master was dead. This man appeared so happy to see one from the above place that he pressed me much to visit the camp, and as a person in the shop offered to accompany me on the following Sunday, which is the general day for seamen obtaining liberty, I agreed to walk there with him. Accordingly, I arrived here at the time appointed, through a waste, sandy country, and on finding the soldier, he conducted us to an arbor in the rear of the encampment, or more properly speaking, hutment, the troops mostly living in huts of their own erection, with gardens behind the same. Here I dined on salt pork, loaf bread, and onions, and he had also obtained from the sutling booth some rum to make us welcome. After dinner I went through the front of the lines, which were nearly extended from Ashley to Cooper's rivers, Charlestown being built at the extremity of the land where these rivers mingled their waters, the town garrison being Hessian troops. In the front of the army there were trenches filled with water, and at intervals a passage remained of the solid ground to act as causeway, which were commanded by cannon placed on log forts, opposite each space. On the outside of the ditch was a single house, where the general resided, beyond which was the parade ground, protected by an abattis line, composed of trees cut down with their branches outward, and on the outside of this were the pickets. On the rivers, galleys mounting heavy ordnance flanked the encampment. While here, I heard of a deserter from the American army, who offered his musket for $1, which I purchased. It was stamped and branded on several parts with the words United States. I continued here to see the night guard paraded, and then returned toward town. After dark, it came on heavy rain, which well wetted us, and my musket shared the same fate. On approaching the town lines, we were challenged by a Hessian sentinel, who was in his box, and let us pass in the rain with little trouble, keeping my gun out of his sight. At this place I have seen at night the whole sky in every visible direction flashing with fire, and which had a most awful and tremendous appearance. This is also a place much subject to thunder and forked lightning, and to prevent damage, the houses have iron rods or conductors from the ground to some distance above the highest point of the dwelling, at which extremity the rod is forked with 3 points to attract the electric fluid. Formerly, the tropical fruits were here in great plenty, supplied from the Bahamas, also the fruit from the northern states, this place being nearly central. I had often heard of men being tarred and feathered in America, and I had now an opportunity of seeing it realized. A Negro, having stolen a goat belonging to the Commodore, was stripped naked, his surface tarred over, and then rolled in fowl's feathers. In this figure he was paraded through the streets. Near our landing place I discovered one day an alligator dead, about 6 or 7 feet long. One of the galleys up the river, belonging to the Quartermaster General's department, was surprised and taken by the Americans in the following manner. A boat came down the river in the night, which was hailed and ordered alongside the galley. They pretended to be going to the town with fodder, under which a number of armed men lay concealed, who boarded the galley, and after wounding many of the crew, secured the vessel. The gunner of this galley took the same station in our ship, to get to England, being much wounded in the head and face. To show the folly and wantonness of seamen, it may not be amiss to relate an anecdote of the crew of a privateer. The Peacock had returned here from a cruise, and the seamen, having received some prize money, purchased several watches, and in a drunken frolic, they determined to fry the works on the fire, and were highly entertained to hear such a number of them ticking in the frying pan. This is a very unhealthy place in the summer, the inhabitants being much subject to fevers and agues. Oysters were plenty, and the river well stored with fish, such as drum, trout, mullet, sheep's head, shad, whiting, and many others unknown by name to me. There's a blue and yellow crab here, about the size of a man's hand, and they are plenty. The way to catch them is to get them into the boat alongside, with a line to reach the bottom, to which any animal's substance may be fastened. After lying at the bottom a few minutes, it is drawn up softly, and you will find the crabs fast to the bait, which they will hold fast to the water's edge. Then, having a cabbage net extended on a small hoop, you place this gently beneath the crabs and secure them, for they always quit their hold on being lifted out of the water. The fish mostly in repute is the blackfish, about the size of an English bream. These are caught with hook and line by negroes in canoes without and to the southward of Charlestown Bar. These boats arrive at the fishing ground about daylight, when 'tis generally little wind, and return with a sea breeze about midday to the fish market, where those men that have caught the greatest quantity of blackfish in a given time receive a bounty. On my first visit here in 1774, large quantities of turkeys and Muscovy ducks were shipped for the Caribbean Islands. Now, scarce one could be seen. The deer formerly ran about the streets with collars around their necks like dogs, but at this latter visit, I do not remember to have seen one. About the middle of May, we took our passengers on board with the mail and proceeded over Charlestown Bar, where we found His Majesty's ship Princess Caroline, Dutch-built, of 50 guns at anchor. She had on board a quantity of French prisoners for England. Mr. Evans, our former mate, and my petty tyrant, was a passenger with us, but being out of office and crestfallen, I was treated with civility, in language as smooth as oil. Lieutenant D.R. entered into conversation with us, and finding I was acquainted with his relations in Falmouth, he invited me into his cabin, in the poop, where I partook of some refreshments and received more respect from the second officer in this ship than I experienced from the lowest officer on board my own. If you've enjoyed this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly, please like, subscribe, and follow on whatever platform you're listening. Check out other ways you can support this project and others in the description. And tune in next time for more from the Journal of Samuel Kelly.